This should never happen to another president again. This hoax. This should never happen to another president again.
Nice thought, but is it even possible? Both sides are addicted to investigations, and it has been going on for decades now.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
The facts have integrity.
They seek to do nothing more than to attack, attack, attack.
When the House voted to impeach President Clinton, Republicans and Democrats went running to their respective corners, and many might argue they never returned. That partisan divide only widened under Presidents Bush and Obama and now Trump, each with their own investigations and scandals and controversies that went back and forth, fueled by the other side.
We were misled that there were supposedly protests and then something sprang out of that, an assault sprang out of that.
The fact is we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
How long will it take you to produce Lois Lerner's emails?
Well,
Could we have that by Friday?
Absolutely not.
Was there ever a time when you drank so much that you couldn't remember what happened or part of what happened the night before?
I don't know. Have you?
This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics.
Wow. That's stress-inducing, right? Here now, Trey Gowdy, former Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee, who you saw in that montage, and now a Fox News contributor. Trey, always good to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. Each side obviously would say that they had very good reason for the investigations on either side, but nonetheless, the tenor of these, sort of tit-for-tat investigations has been something that we've been living with for quite some time.
Yeah, and the next 2 years will be worse. I mean, if the president thought he had a cloud over the last 2 years, at least Mueller did his work confidentially. Congress will not. At least Mueller, I think, had an open mind going into the investigation. Congress does not. Mueller, I was shocked at the paucity of leaks from the Mueller investigation. Congress leaks all the time. So the next 2 years, unfortunately, for my fellow citizens, and I say that seriously, I am sorry for my fellow citizens, most of whom Russia is not number 1 or number 2 on their list of concerns, or the Russia investigation. They're going to be living with this, except in a worse way, for the next 2 years.
All right. Well, you went after Peter Strzok, and that may be where this investigation is headed next. If if you take the president's campaign manager at his word and some folks who are around the president. Here's an exchange that you had with the FBI agent who was one of the early on-board folks in investigating the Trump campaign. Watch this.
You mentioned the use of the word impeachment. That was used in the context of my not knowing what this would lead to. I was not prejudging impeachment. When I used that term, it was saying it might be nothing.
Please.
It might lead all the way to something on the other.
Thank you, Agent Strzok.
Agent Strzok, are you kidding?
If you want to represent what you said accurately, I'm happy to answer that question, but I don't appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
You are obviously very fired up about what you saw in those text messages. Do you believe that that investigation should be the next one that's taken up?
Well, I think it's going to be, I think Lindsey Graham has made it clear. Michael Horowitz is investigating it now. He's no partisan. Bill Barr has expressed an interest in investigating. I would think everybody would want to know, was there sufficient factual predicate for the launching, the initiating of this investigation? It'd be great, Martha, if we could agree we don't need biased FBI agents running counterintelligence investigations. That's something that most Americans do agree on, but Congress cannot. I mean, it'd be great if we had some unanimity. Let's make sure Russia and no one else ever does what they did to us in 2016. But you don't hear anything about that. What could be a unifying finding by Mueller, that Russia targeted us and tried to sow the seeds of discord, that would be unifying. What you'll see is Republicans going to investigate the origins, and you're going to have Schiff. By the way, he's not done with collusion. His political future depends upon there being collusion. He's going to go look into that, and of course Nadler and the rest of them are going to go look at obstruction of justice. So it's going to last for 2 years. It will not be bipartisan. The Senate Intel Committee, I think, did a reasonably good job on the bipartisanship until they got to collusion, but you'd be hard-pressed to find another committee in Congress that did.
You know, you always stuck up for the Mueller investigation. And I'm curious now that you've seen the report and you've seen that he definitely cracked the door open to continue to look into obstruction by not making a definitive conclusion on whether or not he thought there was obstruction of justice. What do you think of the report now that you've seen it, Trey?
I still don't think it should have been made public. And I'm in a really small universe of people that believes that. But I think the Department of Justice speaks in indictments and not in reports. If you have sufficient evidence to charge someone with obstruction, then at least do them the courtesy of allowing 12 of their fellow citizens at some point to hear all the evidence and reach a unanimous verdict. But this is like a hung jury, Martha. I mean, he issues the report. If you like Trump, you dismiss the obstruction. If you don't like Trump, you're going to seize on that. But there's no resolution. There's no verdict, which is why I was flabbergasted that my Republican colleagues thought this report should be made public. What has it resolved? No one's mind has been changed, and it is not the way our justice system, which is the envy of the world, it's not the way it works.
I understand what you're saying. So it seems to me that you would be critical of the fact that Robert Mueller, sort of changed the bar, so to speak, in terms of, he couldn't prosecute on obstruction of justice, but he said, but I also can't exonerate him. That many people say that's not how it works.
Well, the only caveat I would add is Mueller did not make the decision to make this report public. That was Barr. Mueller is entitled to send whatever he wants to the Attorney General. The Comey press conference is what set this unbelievable precedent about discussing people that you don't charge. I think it's appropriate for Mueller to say, look, we didn't charge him, and we're going to tell you, Mr. AG, why we didn't. But Barr made it public.
All right, Trey Gowdy, always great to have you. Thank you very much.
So after 2 long years, here we are. It's hard to believe that any of it actually happened looking back. It was 2 years of unremitting, never diminishing hysteria about Russia. It was a continuous wave of panic and superstition over unseen Slavic interference, all stoked by the very people we're told are the most rational in our society. For 2 years, our capital city became a kind of massive CNN panel, a living monument to ignorance and dishonesty, where the loudest and the dumbest invariably got the most attention. We just lived through 2 full years of that. Screaming, threatening, surveillance, character assassination, loyalty tests, wild allegations of treason and spying and betrayal from office holders. Innocent people found themselves afraid to go to dinner, scared to send text messages or talk on the phone. For 2 years, we lived in an all-pervasive cult of personality. Our leaders worshipped a 74-year-old federal prosecutor who almost never spoke in public. He alone was good, they told us. Only they could interpret his will. It was all thoroughly bizarre. Demented, really, though nobody said so at the time. They were too afraid. It seems like a dream now, which actually it was. None of it was real. Nobody colluded with Vladimir Putin. Nobody changed vote totals or met secretly in Prague or had a P-tape, whatever that is. There was never a Russia conspiracy. Hillary Clinton wasn't robbed of her rightful position by Julian Assange or Roger Stone or anyone else. Hillary lost the election because she was an entitled boor who didn't run on anything. In the end, that's what Robert Mueller proved. The news anchors couldn't handle that. They couldn't handle that conclusion. It was too far from what they'd promised their audiences for so long. They were too invested in the lies. When the report arrived in Congress this morning, they found themselves reduced to huffing and sputtering. They couldn't admit what was in the report. Well, they told us, Robert Mueller didn't exonerate President Trump. Okay. I mean, that may be true, but only theologically. Mueller doesn't have the power to absolve sin. Only God can. But in every other sense, Mueller's report was exculpatory. If dozens of federal prosecutors spent 2 years trying to charge you with the crime and then found they couldn't, it would mean there wasn't any real evidence you did it. And that's what happened here. You may not like Donald Trump, but that's what we just learned from the Mueller report. You would have to be a mindless partisan to deny it. A lot of news anchors turn out to be mindless partisans. When the facts contravene the interests of their party, they deny the facts. Then they attack anyone who persists in stating the obvious out loud. So suddenly the very same people who lied to you for 2 years about Russia are demanding that under no circumstances are you allowed to believe anything that the Attorney General Bill Barr might say. Sure, Barr may look like a conventional Republican. He was a Jeb Bush donor and everything. And he does appear to be a close personal friend of Robert Mueller's. But that's why he's so tricky. It's all a ruse. In fact, Barr is a Putin stooge like all the rest.
If you look at his behavior, it is not that of a geriatric. It is that of a partisan.
But this looks like an inside job. We shouldn't take anything that Barr says tomorrow as anything other than performative coonery.
Is Barr the president's new fixer? The answer to that seems to be yes.
But he becomes the first cabinet secretary to plunge into the deep end of Trump's conspiracy pool.
So it was an inside job. That's the reigning assumption in Washington. Somehow, the Attorney General is preventing Robert Mueller from concluding that Donald Trump colluded with Vladimir Putin and from telling the rest of us about it. How is Barr doing that? Well, it's not clear how he's doing that, but they are no less certain that he is doing that. Michelle Goldberg of the New York Times announced today that Barr's press conference this morning marked America's transformation into a, quote, authoritarian junta. Her colleague at the New York Times, Maggie Haberman, suggested that Trump might be a Nazi because the White House played a song from The Sound of Music, which, by the way, is an anti-Nazi musical, but it's still Germanic sounding and therefore suspicious. These are hysterical children. They should not be in journalism, but they are. In fact, they run journalism, and they have no plans on giving up their power. The Mueller report is probably the single most humiliating thing that has ever happened to the White House press corps in the history of this country. So how did reporters in Washington respond today when it finally came out? Well, they did what they do best. They celebrated themselves. Over on CNN, former Obama official, now posing as a reporter, Jim Sciutto, bragged that the Mueller report had, quote, debunked all of Donald Trump's unfair attacks on the media. At Jeff Bezos' newspaper, a guy called Philip Bump was telling us that, quote, the vast amount of reporting on Russia was accurate. Even they don't really believe this. They know they lied. As we told you a minute ago, BuzzFeed claimed its reporters had seen personally, with their own eyes, evidence that Michael Cohen had been instructed by Donald Trump himself to perjure himself. This was going to be grounds for impeachment. The editor of BuzzFeed defended that story even after the Mueller investigation took the unusual step of publicly saying it wasn't true. BuzzFeed went all in, and they defended it. They'd seen it with their own eyes. He told us that on this set, on this show. And now there's no question about it. It's over. It's done. It was a lie. That and so much more, all lies. So what happens now that we know those were lies? What do we do with, I don't know, John Brennan and James Clapper? The two of them used to run our most powerful intelligence agencies. For the past couple of years, they've gotten a lot richer than they've ever been from yapping about Russia on television. Only problem? All lies.
What makes you believe that he has more indictments?
Because he hasn't addressed the issues related to criminal conspiracy as well as any individuals.
Criminal conspiracy involving the Russian influence?
Russians, yes, yeah.
Is there influence, whether witting or unwitting, by the Russians over President Trump? And you know, in the intervening year and a half or so, you know, his behavior hasn't done much, at least in my mind, to allay that concern.
So do Clapper and Brennan get to keep their cable television contracts? Probably. In decadent societies, the guilty aren't punished. Only the unpopular are punished. Over on the other channels, they're still talking about Trump tonight, of course, not talking about themselves or their failures. The line they're quoting most is from today's report. It was apparently Trump's response when he first learned there was going to be a special counsel investigation into Russia. Oh, God, he said, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed. Well, as it turns out, Trump was wrong on the specifics. He didn't get indicted. Mueller didn't drive him from office. It wasn't the end of his presidency, strictly speaking. But as usual, Trump's instincts were clearer. In fact, they were dead on. In the ways that matter most, the Russia hoax did end his presidency in some sense. It certainly sabotaged it. Mueller's investigation ended critical momentum from the 2016 election almost immediately, momentum that every incoming president uses to get your program enacted, to make good on the promises you just made to voters. Trump didn't have that, thanks to Russia. Lawmakers, including a shamefully large number of Republicans, who we really should name, but we're out of time, but we will at some point, They were all much happier to talk about Russia than about changing the status quo in Washington, something they were benefiting from, but which Trump ran against. And so they did talk about Russia endlessly. The result? An election that should have realigned our political process and changed this country had almost no effect. 2 years later, virtually nothing has changed. Millions are still flooding over our border from the third world. They're encouraged by an army of nonprofits that instruct them to subvert and mock our laws. The opioid epidemic rages on as horrifying and horrible and destructive as ever. Suicides are up. Our troops are still bogged down in Syria and Afghanistan and many other places. Goldman Sachs still controls our economy. Tech companies are still spying on you, crushing your freedom of speech. You can still have your life ruined for supporting the wrong candidate in public or for believing there are two genders. Most ominous of all and most often ignored, Americans are dying younger and having fewer children. None of this was ever resolved. None of it was ever talked about. The Russia investigation didn't destroy Trump, but it did a lot to destroy this country.